If you were an attorney for Usher today and you realize that his name has been brought up in connection to this case, what's your advice to him if he was your client?
You already know what it is. It's your boy Laid Back with another reaction, another review, another episode. Hey, Diddy, you up to bat. Pause. Bah! It's your boy Laid Back. Welcome back to my channel. Hey, two things we got to do. You got to hit that subscribe button. I'm drinking this water. You already know what it is, man. You are the prize in 2025. You are the prize in 2025. Make sure you hit the like button. Make sure you hit the notification bell. You know I'm covering all the Diddy stuff, man. Trying to stay up to date with it. It's a lot going on, man. I told you it's going to be videos everywhere. All type of different type. But we got Usher Neo just named in P. Diddy trial. We was looking for names. They starting to come out. You make it to the end of this one, you a real one for real. Make sure you put that in the comments, man. But let's go ahead and get it. Fire Squad. Let's pop it. Let's get it.
Bombshell name drop during testimony in the Sean Diddy Combs trafficking and racketeering trial. Why were singers Usher and Neo brought up in the courtroom? We're diving into the connection these A-listers and music legends have to the now disgraced music mogul, and what the night in question that a witness claims they were in attendance for means to how this trial could play out. We're on the case presented by Law and Crime. I'm Chris Stewart.
Here we go.
Sean Combs is connected to a lot of big names in Hollywood and the music industry. That's not breaking news, but it was a bit of a surprise this week when Usher and Neo's names came up during testimony. The witness that brought up Neo and Usher was Dawn Richard. She was once a member of the singing group Danity Kane. That group was signed to Diddy's label, Bad Boy Records, and she also sang for another bad boy group called Diddy Dirty Money. Sean Combs was actually part of that group. It was a trio. They had a few songs that came out between 2009 and 2011. Prosecutors called Richard to testify. Now, before I get into the moment where Usher and Neo were brought up, I want to take you through her testimony and what led to the point that she brought their names into this. Now, Richard told prosecutors in 2009, she witnessed Sean Combs allegedly attack his then girlfriend, Cassandra Ventura, the singer known as Cassie, who has already testified in this trial that she was abused by Combs physically and sexually during their 10-year relationship that ended in 2018. Now, here's a line in the transcript where Richard said, quote, "I observed Cassie being attacked," and then when asked who attacked Cassie, she answered, quote, "She was attacked by Sean Combs." In the incident in 2009 that Richard talked about, she said she was recording music at Combs' LA home. Cassie was making eggs, and then Combs comes downstairs, quote, angry, and was saying where the expletive was his eggs. Excuse my language. And he was telling Cassie that she never gets anything right, where the expletive is his food. And he proceeded to come over to her, took the skillet with the eggs in it, and then tried to hit her over the head with it, and she fell to the ground. Richard told prosecutors that
He took the what? The skillet with the eggs in it? Come on, bro.
Tried to hit her over the head with it, and she fell to the ground. Richard told prosecutors that she witnessed Diddy allegedly attack Cassie multiple times, physically beating her. And while she was a member of Diddy Dirty Money between 2009 and 2011, she said it was frequent that she would see these things. She said that Combs would, quote, punch her, choke her, drag her, slap her in the mouth. I saw him kick her, punch her in the stomach. Now, when it comes to Usher and Neo, their names are brought up related to an incident in 2010 that happened at a restaurant in California. Dawn Richard was asked about this incident both by the prosecution and defense, but it's interesting how her answers and the details she gives are different depending on the questions that are asked. Richard was asked about that incident. It was in West Hollywood, California. There was a restaurant, a dinner with a lot of powerful people in 2010. And at that dinner, Richard says Diddy allegedly punched Cassie in the stomach. She said, quote, "We were having a private conversation, and when we're all sitting, eating at the tables together, when I say we, I mean some bad boys, some of our other label, and some celebrities were in the room, and they were secretly arguing, and he punched her in the stomach." Sean Combs punched her in the stomach. The prosecution then asks, quote, who, if any of Mr. Combs' employees were present? And Richard says Harv Pierre, Capricorn Clark, Mia, D-Rock, Bonds, myself, and Kalina Harper. Now the prosecution then asks Richard about Harv Pierre. He was a bad boy executive and he answered to Sean Diddy Combs. The prosecution also asks how, quote, employees reacted to Combs allegedly punching Cassie in the stomach, to which Richard answered, they didn't. No one intervened. We didn't. Now remember, Richard said celebrities were at that restaurant, but the prosecution didn't really follow that line in their questioning. They did ask about bad boy employees who were present at the restaurant, to which Richard named people like Combs, the bodyguard D-Rock, Pierre the executive. But then the defense had their chance at cross-examination, and through their questioning is when we saw those big names drop. The defense asked Richard, please tell me who was all at this restaurant. Richard answers, Harv Pierre, Capricorn Clark, Mia, and myself, Kalina, our bodyguards, which was Bonds, and D-Rock, Cassie. The question continues with the defense asking, you remember who was all there, right? And Richard says, The defense asks, do you recall alleging several celebrities were actually there? And Richard says yes, and the defense then says, quote, so when the government asked you who was all there, and I asked you who was all there right now, you didn't mention any of the celebrities, right? Right, Richard says. The defense then asks Richard to name the celebrities. And then she says, quote, Usher was there, Jimmy Levine was there, Neo came through. There were a few others too. I don't recall those people, but those are the ones I remember talking to. The defense then pressed Richard a bit, asking why she didn't say those names before when she was asked about who was there by the defense. And Richard says she was just repeating what she told the government in their direct examination. Usher and Diddy go back decades. Usher lived with Combs for a year, actually, when he was just a rising star in the music industry. He was 13, 14 years old at the time. Usher actually spoke about living with Combs in an interview 8 years ago on the Howard Stern show. Here's part of what he said.
You're going to go to Puff Daddy's. He's going
in the 90s. Do you understand what that's like?
Puffy's place was like just filled with chicks and orgying like nonstop, right?
No, not really. I mean, but hey, it was curious. I got a chance to see some things.
Now, as far as Grammy winner Neo, he is someone who has been known to be a friend of Diddy and to be in the same social circles over the years. He faced backlash for a comment he made in the wake of Diddy's arrest during a performance in New Zealand last year, where he reportedly said, quote, on stage, I was assaulted and I liked it. I had a great time and I'd do it again. He later apologized for that and said, quote, in an attempt to be playful with my fans, I made an insensitive and irresponsible joke while on tour, and I'd like to truly apologize from the bottom of my heart. This is according to the UK media outlet, The Metro. Now, the other name that Richard mentioned was Jimmy Levine. He is a music legend. He is known as the co-founder of Interscope Records, so an incredibly powerful person in the music industry. It's important to note that in her testimony, Richard did not specifically say that any of the three actually witnessed that alleged moment where Combs punched Ventura in the stomach, but she did say that they were allegedly there that night. Now, none of the three have released statements since their names were brought up in court. Combs is on trial. He's expected to be on trial for roughly 7 more weeks. He's charged with racketeering, trafficking by force, and transportation to engage in prosecution. He has pleaded not guilty. Joining us now once again to talk about this case is former prosecutor and criminal defense attorney Safa Robinson Ferrer. Always great to have you on Law and Crime. Usher's name, he comes up yesterday, and that was kind of a moment where people clearly recognize who Don Richard was talking about. What should we take away from that anecdote and the fact that Usher's name was brought up?
The fact that Usher's name was brought up, I think one of two things about it. On one hand, it's irrelevant. It doesn't go to prove or disprove whether Mr. Combs is guilty of the charges as alleged in the indictment. On the other hand, I do think that it provides background information that there were other individuals that could have possibly observed these alleged assaults or attacks on Ms. Ventura. Not only that, but if the government intends on establishing a timeline or a pattern of events with respect to Mr. Combs, his enterprise, and their dealings with individuals from the public or in the industry, it's good to note that the allegation, or at least the testimony came in, that Usher was involved with Mr. Combs early on in his career when he was approximately, I believe, 14 years of age, that he had gone to some sort of academy through.
Wasn't Justin Bieber like 14 or 15 or something like that in the video that we seen with him and Diddy? And he was like, yo, when you turn 16, you're going to be able to drive this car right here. Was it 15, 16? And now they saying Usher was like 14.
Mr. Combs' enterprise or business. And the government can certainly use that to show a long pattern of behavior, dealings that he may have had with other individuals in the industry, and also to establish that Mr. Combs and Ms. Ventura had this long-standing relationship, that not only, there were a select few that got to observe, but that publicly some of these allegations or allegations of violence happened, and that other people observed those things.
When we look at the transcript, and I have it here, and you have the defense asking why Richard did not talk previously in conversations with the government about Usher being there, Jimmy Levine, who's a famous producer, as well as the singer Neo. Should we take anything away from that it appeared that their names didn't come up earlier when she was having conversations with the government?
Yeah, what we can take away, and what the defense is essentially trying to do here, is really strike at her credibility. What the defense did during its cross-examination is say, well, these other individuals were there and you didn't disclose their names until now. And why was that? If you are participating in a government investigation, you're presumed and you should tell the truth, the whole truth, and the full truth. And you failed to disclose a significant thing, which were the other individuals that were present. You failed to disclose that to the government. And now it's only today, as you're testifying, that we're just now hearing of these other individuals, Usher Raymond, Neo, and other executive producers that were involved or possibly witnesses to the case. Again, striking at her credibility because she did not tell the full truth at the time she was asked by the government, which later down the line during closing arguments, the defense can get up and say, Ms. Richard testified A, B, and C to you. However, she failed to disclose X, Y, and Z, and that's why you shouldn't believe her. That's why you should not give her the credibility that the judge is going to instruct you on, and the jury can take that into consideration.
And one thing that's been apparent throughout all the witnesses thus far is clearly this was a relationship that had a lot of domestic violence incidents, but this isn't a domestic violence case.
Right.
Yet it seems like there's a lot of people who witnessed physical abuse. And in this case, you have Usher and Neo. I mean, these are A-list celebrities who are seeing Sean Combs punch his girlfriend allegedly in the stomach, which is something that you would think if you saw that, on the outside, if you think you'd stop that, you would step in, you would say something, but apparently they didn't, according to Don Richard's testimony. Does any of that, the fact that he was doing this out in the open, play towards taking some of the domestic violence incidents, but showing that it was a much larger thing, which is what the government's trying to prove?
So with respect to the other individuals being present, although there's an allegation that they were present, and they're not really allegations, it's just background facts. I don't know that Ms. Richard has testified that they actually observed the striking. Right. Maybe they did, maybe they did not. But I don't think that that's going to do any benefit for the government as far as knowing that these things happened more broadly. I mean, it's clear as day that this case is rooted in domestic violence, that Mr. Combs was domestically violent towards Ms. Ventura, whether it was isolated behind closed doors and just Ms. Ventura, and a close select few were testifying to this, or on a grander scale where, a select few and publicly people can testify or people have observed these allegations, whether it was just one or whether it was many. Testimony is evidence, and whether that was testimony from one person or testimony from multiple people, the jury can still consider that as evidence in determining whether Mr. Combs is guilty or not guilty. If these individuals observe that, then, the hope would be that someone would have intervened earlier on. But again, it doesn't negate the fact that, the charges here are racketeering, trafficking, and things of that nature. One of the things the government is alleging is the use of force. So I think that's why we continue to hear this domestically violent line of questioning. And I think the government is hoping that the jurors will view this as satisfactory to the element requiring requiring force, physical force of violence.
Yeah, and to your point, I'll just looking at this transcript, you're right. Yeah, it's Usher was there, Jimmy Levine was there, Neo came through. So it's saying that they were there, not necessarily that they witnessed
Right.
the abuse that Dawn
Right.
Richard said happened at this dinner. What did you make of her testimony now that she's off the stand?
You know, it was pretty interesting testimony. I don't know that she was a necessary witness, although the government deemed her to be necessary. Ms. Ventura got on the stand and testified about the abuse. It testified about what happened to her. Ms. Richard seemingly came up behind her and corroborated for the government those allegations. And I don't think there was even a question about that. The hotel footage came into evidence. Ms. Ventura testified, so now Ms. Richard is here testifying to more allegations of domestic violence. And the government has to be really careful here, because the way that it is being painted at this point is that this is a domestically violent case, which is true. But the government needs to prove a RICO. They need to prove trafficking. They don't need to prove domestic violence, and it can certainly confuse the issues with the jury and ultimately land them in.
That's a great point, because a lot of people, especially online, is focusing on the domestic side of Diddy, right? Being aggressive, beating on Cassie, being abusive, but you still got to prove the RICO. You know what I'm saying? You still got to prove the trafficking stuff. So even I think Diddy's team was like, yo, we know that he's done domestic things and violence and stuff like that, but you got to prove the other stuff. I think initially that was their opening statement. Like, we're not saying that Diddy is a saint, that he didn't, do any of these heinous things to Cassie. So I think that's a great point.
Verdict of not guilty.
I know some of the evidence that the government will point to, some of frequent flyer accounts, credit cards, bank accounts. We haven't really heard a lot about that as of yet. How do you see the government, now that they've really established, whether it's Cassie's testimony, some things that Dawn Richard has said about the domestic abuse, the violence that was in this relationship, where do they go from here if they are going to paint this picture of a RICO, which is essentially what they need to do in this trial if they want to get a conviction?
Yeah, so what the government's going to continue to do is put on their witnesses. I think that they got a witness on the stand that worked for Mr. Combs at a certain point in time. That individual also testified to some alleged violent behavior on behalf of Mr. Combs. I think if this individual is still testifying, or as other individuals continue to testify, we will start to hear about transportation with regard to these alleged workers. So one of the things that the government has to prove and show is that there was a transportation via interstate commerce, which is a very wide net and catch-all for the government in order to seek a conviction, is that these individuals were transported or traveled via interstate commerce from one state to another. So we may hear testimony about frequent flyer accounts, or whoever the individual was that set up these or purchased these plane tickets, or if they flew private. Whoever set up the transportation and travel may ultimately testify. We might hear from them to further establish that this was a trafficking case.
And on the interstate commerce charge, if they were to buy an escort from Miami and fly them to New York, would that be considered interstate commerce?
That would be. So the plane traveling from Miami to New York is an indication that this was via interstate commerce, because it's going from one state to another. Even if they traveled via train or via car, going across state lines would satisfy that factor.
We've seen Cassie's off the stand, but whether it's Dawn Richard's testimony, David James, who's the former personal assistant, he's talked about Cassie as well. What do you make at this point, seeing how the testimony's going, that the government decided to have Cassie early on in this trial as opposed to building up to her testimony at the end?
I'm always in favor, as a former prosecutor, I'm always in favor of putting my victim on last if I can, because her words will echo to the jury indefinitely. Yes, she could have testified early, and people will tend to remember what they've heard early on and later in the game. But I think here it's really impactful to build up the puzzle. these other individuals who were involved and ultimately get us to Ms. Ventura, who, will testify as to what specifically happened. And the jury is going to be more likely to remember her testimony, especially compelling testimony, if she is the last and key witness. And there would have been a buildup that the government would have made to her testimony. Now, it doesn't mean that they can't come back guilty because she did testify early on. And now these individuals that are testifying are further establishing what happened. That's just a personal preference and what the government ultimately deemed as the best way to, put their witnesses on. And also, Ms. Ventura is pregnant, heavily pregnant. They didn't want to run the risk of her going into labor later on during the trial and not being able to be present to testify. So I think that they did have to get her out of the way early. My preference just would have been to put her on later if I was the prosecutor on the case.
We've seen a couple cross-examinations from Sean Combs' defense team. How would you say they're doing thus far?
I think they're doing a great job. I think that the defense is eliciting facts or alleged facts that the prosecution has kept out so far. And one of the things that we always discuss, in trial practice is you never want the jury to find something out from the other side. If you have bad facts for your case, you want to get them out there and do away with it and show them it's not a big deal. Yes, she may not have disclosed certain information previously, and I can explain later as to why. But you really want to get those bad facts out of the way. And I think that at least some of the testimony that I've seen or heard is that, when these when the prosecution witnesses are testifying under cross-examination, the defense is getting out facts that really kind of hurt the prosecution. I think that with Ms. Richard's testimony, she testified that, she had been working with Mr. Combs, that she observed these allegations of violence and things of that nature. But then later down the line, she goes to work for him and works in a musical group with him and another individual. We didn't hear that under the direct examination. We heard that under cross-examination. And I think that those are the things that the government needs to be mindful of.
Oh, that's slippery. That's slippery. So you went back to work with him. Like she said, that information came out because of the cross-examination. So if we never would have asked the right questions, you would have never told us that information. And that's a key part to be like, okay, but you still went back and worked with him. Not saying it's right or wrong, but I'm just saying, like she just saying, facts is being left out and is being found out because of the cross-examination.
Group with him and another individual. We didn't hear that under the direct examination. We heard that under cross-examination. And I think that those are the things that the government needs to be mindful of because they do seem to be surprising facts as the defense brings them out during cross-examination. And they don't want to turn the jury off and they don't want to hide anything from the jury.
And with some of these big celebrity names that have come up, Kid Cudi, the rapper who I'm forgetting his real name right now, but he dated Cassie for a bit. His name was brought up. Usher and Neo are brought up yesterday. How likely is it any of these figures from any of the big celebrity names? I know Justin Bieber has said he won't be testifying, and his name was brought up a bit on the outside over the past week. Have there been any celebrities, I guess, moving forward that you would expect to see on the stand?
I'm not sure. I think any celebrity is going to want to stay as far away from this case as possible. But what will be interesting, and I my own self have been curious too, is if Kid Cudi is going to testify. One of the things that we've heard throughout, even prior to the trial beginning, is that Mr. Combs allegedly blew up his car. If that is the case, that is an arson, and that is one of the predicate offenses that could be established under the RICO charge. Ms. Ventura testified somewhat to him blowing up the car, but other than hearsay about it, so that someone said that Mr. Combs blew up this car, there hasn't been, at least in my knowledge, any factual basis to believe that that is true. Yes, they can testify to that. However, are there going to be any photos introduced? Is Mr. Cudi going to get on the stand and testify? Yes, I had this relationship with Ms. Ventura. Ultimately, my car was blown up. Here are the photos of that. Here's the police report and investigation. And this was what ultimately was determined as a result of that. And I know it was Mr. Combs because of X, Y, and Z.
If you were an attorney for Usher today and you realize that his name has been brought up in connection to this case, what's your advice to him if he was your client?
Continue to remain silent. This is not our fight. We don't have anything to prove or disprove. I would not want Mr. Raymond to get involved in this case and speak on this case whatsoever. He's got a career. He's a great star. He doesn't want that tainted in any way. And there's nothing for us to say. There's nothing for us to prove. In the event that, something were to come down the line that would escalate his level of involvement in this case, then we can engage. But other than that, there's nothing for us to say. There's nothing for us to prove. There are no allegations that, we had any participation in any criminal conduct. So I don't think that there is anything that needs to be said.
And then just lastly, and I kind of like just asking you and our experts when they come on as we watch this case, though we're still in the very beginning, has there been anything that surprised you to this point?
There's nothing that surprised me other than the fact that, this case is, and we all know it, heavily inundated with facts about domestic violence and physical assaults. When we knew that when we saw the video. What I'd like to see is the government further establish and lay a foundation for the other charges. And they may very well be doing that, and we're always getting things secondhand because there are no cameras allowed in the courtroom. However, if they want to successfully prove the RICO and trafficking and things like that, I have a difficult time watching them focus so much in on the domestic violence factor and not addressing the other factors that they would be required by law to prove with this case.
All right, former prosecutor, criminal defense attorney Safa Robinson Ferrer. It's always great to have you on Law and Crime. Thanks for being with us.
All right, so stuff getting spicy in the courtroom, man, and they dropping names. You know what I mean? So this is he punched her in the stomach, and like they said though, the domestic violence and the issues that he's having with these domestic issues and abuse is not what he's on trial for. It's for the racketeering and it's for the trafficking. So like they saying, the media and everybody is talking about what's going on with the DV, but you gotta prove the racketeering. And like they said, maybe that's what they building up to, you know what I mean? But that's not what's going on right now in regards to him being on trial for domestic violence and him getting, convicted of that. So I think that was a great point that they pointed out, because even with the Tory Lanez case, everybody was talking about how Tory Lanez has shot Megan allegedly, but he wasn't on trial for shooting her. He was on trial for having a gun, you know what I'm saying? And not supposed to have a gun. So just paying attention to what's really supposed to be the charges and what they're trying to go after him for is very important. So I like the fact that they brought that up. But like I said, this is some crazy stuff, man. You let me know in the comments what you think about this stuff. Till next time, man, self-love and positivity. Fire Squad, I got you and you know it.